morning, everyone, and happy Women's Day to all the women in the audience. So I must say that I was caught a little off guard this morning because I came prepared with about 10 slides, right? I was hoping to actually take support of those. And then, is it good? Is it good? Okay. Okay. And I just realized that, we're not going to get help from the PowerPoint, so I'm just going to go without PowerPoint, but I guess I memorized my foils very well, so it should be easy and shorter for you, right? I'm going to keep it short. So I think, yeah, all of you, I'm sure, know Intel. Intel is probably the largest chip maker in the world. And I'm going to focus on Intel India and how we are contributing to the smart infrastructure. That's going to be the focus of this today's session. Intel India has been around for 30 years in India, and we are the largest non-manufacturing facility outside US for Intel. And we were about 2,000 people about 2 years ago, and then we are close to touching 8,000. A lot of investment going in, about $3 billion. And what's more important is actually in line with Honorable Prime Minister Mr. Modi's vision, Digital India, Make in India, skill up-leveling the skills, etc., what you've been following. Intel is actually investing on those lines, right? And if you've been following press, it's about Makers Lab, where we're actually working with students and we're working with the developer community across the spectrum in basically helping them drive the innovation. And we also have sales offices, probably in 4 locations, Bangalore, Delhi, Bombay, and Pune. But one of the more important thing is basically what does it mean to Intel's presence in Digital India? And Intel traditionally is known for PCs, as most of you know. But the thing is, in the last 2 years, the trajectory is changing. And our CEO and chairman has recently come up with something called a virtuous cycle. When we say virtuous cycle, how different things, the paradigms that we're seeing, the phenomenon in the world, how is it moving? Basically, everyone's talking about smart connected world. We're not talking about the cities. We're actually talking about infrastructure. We're talking about connected cars. We're talking about autonomous cars. So what it means is basically there is a lot of data getting generated, and I'll get into smart grid shortly, but everywhere, you take manufacturing as an example, transportation as an example, there's a lot of data getting generated, and that data is actually residing somewhere, right? So if you could help me visualize, basically, I was, again, as I said, hoping to rely upon that foil. But the thing is, you have edge. For all of us in smart grid domain, we all understand that the 3 levels, right, in the spectrum, which is the edge, and then you have the connectivity in between. It could be multiple communication technologies. And we have a backend, which is basically where the data resides. And in today's world and in future, we hope to actually derive something meaningful out of that data, which is big data analytics, and in future, we're talking about moving to artificial intelligence, deep learning, etc., etc. So if you look at those 3 spectrums, the edge, the connectivity, and the backend, that's exactly how we're looking at that virtuous cycle. Because, as you improve your edge, you get a lot of meaningful data and the drivers for efficiency, new revenues in the backend, because you're able to help all the stakeholders, right from the enterprises, to the citizens, to the workers who are in the field, get better efficiencies and also revenue out of it. And once that starts happening, you start investing more in the edge or in the backend. So it's a virtuous cycle. And that's exactly where Intel is heading. And that resonates very well with what we talk about, when we talk about Digital India, because that's exactly what the government is doing. We're actually building infrastructure, both physical infrastructure as well as the digital infrastructure. We're talking about National Informatics Center. We're talking about several cloud service providers coming in, empaneled service providers by the government, building those big data centers and the infrastructure in the digital world, as well as the physical infrastructure, smart cities. And on the edge, where we talk about the data, 1.2 billion citizens, there are this number of initiatives that are underway. We're talking about education, healthcare, how to make it better and more scalable through technology. Smart cities, again, is IoT and smart cities. There are the drivers for a lot of data, right? And I think that's where the most of the investment is. And Make in India, clearly manufacturing being one of them, and the innovation, startup momentum. This is all a lot of, in the technology world, we're talking about a lot of workloads that are actually helping us, again, reinvest in the infrastructure. But for all this to happen, for the edge to talk to the back end, you need that connectivity piece, right? And that's where we're talking about broadband provision, broadband telcos and the service providers investing heavily into that area. And I think 5G recently has picked up momentum. And then if you go to Google and do 5G India, there are several innovative ideas, because suddenly from a medium that was meant to be a people-to-people communication, we're talking about a machine-to-machine communication. We're talking about how to make the devices talk to each other. And 5G, I think, clearly is one technology that could help us leapfrog. So I think in terms of, as I said, Intel's virtuous cycle, where we're investing heavily into sensors, the edge devices, the drones not for, the cool factor it brings along, but I think it's been proven in many use cases that drones can actually help with the productivity into those uncharted areas, especially in oil and gas, where you cannot really go look at the rig operations on a daily basis. I think drones come into play. So is the case with video surveillance. Instead of actually having people and bringing in the manual intervention sometimes, which is prone to error, in some of the remote areas, you can have drones do the surveillance. And I think pretty much in every vertical that we look at, drones play a huge role. And I think smart grid or oil and gas, the utilities field itself is, I think, a very ripe factor for that. So be it in the data center space or in the new technologies or in the IoT space, we are actually closely mirroring what India is thinking about in terms of that virtuous cycle. Yeah? And one other thing I want to talk about is basically, smart grid. All of us understand why it's important. But the thing is, it's going through 3 different phases. I think the first element is, even before we talk about investing in new grid, the first thing is to show some value out of the existing legacy infrastructure. And I think of all the legacy infrastructures, probably smart grid is the one that has the largest assets lying there. So the first step is to go monitor, just sense what's out there, and how much value can we derive out of optimizing that. Just to give you some numbers, in transmission and distribution losses, that's about 22% losses in India, right? And most of the states are probably about 15%. That's a given. Basically, there is potential for us to go and then address that 15% losses, which is across most of the states. And the average for India is 22%. And there are some states that are probably at 50%. So we're saying it starts with looking at savings. You derive the savings and then go ahead and then bring in the automation, bring in the simulation techniques, big data analytics to optimize it further. So it's again, you pick any city or you pick any infrastructure, it itself goes to a virtuous cycle, because you invest, you attract more people, and the more people would cause a burden on the infrastructure, be it utilities, be it in transportation, et cetera, and then that will actually motivate all of us to invest a lot more into that particular infrastructure. So that's the phase we take. And in terms of Intel's primary role, I think we're talking about monitoring as the first phase. Once the monitoring is done, and if you're able to extract value out of it, we move to the second phase, which is how do I control? The first one is a one-way communication. You're just sensing the devices, and that devices need a lot of intelligence too to give you the information that you need. And that's where the sensors and the chip and the intelligence in the chip comes into picture. And one thing I want to touch upon is, again, a technical term called FPGA, which Intel recently acquired a company called Altera. And the idea of that is, I just touched upon a lot of legacy assets being in place. And one thing that comes to most of the stakeholders and the decision makers is, how do I protect my existing infrastructure? And one thing we thought about is, okay, fine, the world is moving into a connected world. And if I took an example of a sensor, that sensor could be used for multiple use cases. I mean, I can probably take a camera, which is at the intersection in traffic, and that could be used for surveillance. It could be used for traffic management. It could probably be used for environmental sensing and many more use cases we could go on. But the thing is, how does that chip know that I'm actually operating in a traffic context? Or now I'm operating in an environment context. So I need to respond differently to the different things that are happening in that intersection. So that's where the FPGA comes into picture. It's a programmable chip which has the intelligence to understand the context it is in. And we can probably funnel it down to the smart grid and then say, yes, when I'm in the distribution, it has to operate differently. When I'm in the transmission phase, it has to operate differently. When it's actually communicating with a worker on field, right? I enable the worker with a technology, but the thing is, I should understand what the context in which the operator is working in. So all that intelligence will go right to the chip, so that, we're kind of balancing it's a trade-off between how much effort you put in the hardware versus how much effort you put in the software. Because if some of the intelligence is already built in, and if the chip is going somewhere, trending towards artificial intelligence, then I think the overall total cost of operations or the effort you put in building that entire stack becomes relatively easy. And that's the direction we are headed in, right? Some examples in the IoT space. And on the data center space, clearly big data analytics, artificial intelligence, these are very important. And our R&D team is actually working towards, with the local ecosystem partners, to create those use cases which are very relevant for India. And again, I was hoping to share one slide on, if you look at the edge, you look at the connectivity, you look at the backend, what are the different things that are coming to picture, and what are the top of mind? What are the issues that most of our customers are talking to us about? Definitely security is one, manageability, interoperability, and scalability. The cost of operations aside, because that's the first thing, right? What's the ROI in it? Once we address that, the other things need to be addressed through technology, and we have a portfolio of solutions and products to address the same need. And I would be happy to actually talk to you about that. And we have most of these actually showcased in our booth downstairs, so I would encourage all of you to go take a look at it, and I'll be there during the day. Would be happy to actually go into the details. Thank you so much for the opportunity.